Flashing blue lights shatter the darkness of a lonely, winding stretch of highway. You check your speedometer exactly the limit. Your hands immediately grip the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Beside you, your spouse stiffens, the warm silence in the car instantly replaced by the deafening roar of a siren and the pounding of your own heartbeat. For most people, a late-night traffic stop is merely a frustrating inconvenience. But in certain towns on certain unlit roads, it's a terrifying roll of the dice. What happens when the man with the badge thinks he holds all the power, completely unaware that the driver he just profiled has the full weight of the federal government sitting quietly in the glove box? Damien and Cassandra Hastings had done everything right. It was a crisp Thursday evening in late October, and they were driving home from a spectacular dinner in the city celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary. Cassandra, a partner at a prestigious downtown architecture firm, was humming softly to a classic R&B track playing on the stereo. She looked stunning in a deep emerald dress, her head resting gently against the passenger window. Damien, wearing a sharp charcoal suit minus the tie he had discarded an hour ago, drove their brand new dark sapphire sedan with the relaxed confidence of a man perfectly at peace with his life. They had recently moved to the upscale, quiet outskirts of Pine Valley, a sprawling suburban community known for its manicured lawns, stellar school districts, and an undercurrent of old money exclusivity. It was a predominantly white enclave, and while they had dealt with the occasional lingering stare at the grocery store or the forced, overly polite smiles from neighbors, they loved their new home. The drive along Route 119, the main artery connecting the city to Pine Valley, was pitch black. The towering pines flanking the two-lane road swallowed the headlights, creating a tunnel effect. Damien was cruising exactly at the posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour. He was a man who lived by the rules, both by nature and by profession. That was when the darkness behind them exploded in a blinding flash of blue and white strobes. Damien sighed, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "You've got to be kidding me." Cassandra sat up straight, the relaxed aura in the car evaporating instantly. The music seemed entirely too loud now, though it was barely a whisper. She reached out and turned the dial until there was dead silence. "Damien, were you speeding?" 45 on the dot, Cass, Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a calm, measured cadence. He activated his right turn signal, slowly pulling the sedan onto the narrow gravel shoulder. He put the car in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all four windows, a habit ingrained in him for transparency. He left his hands resting clearly on the top of the steering wheel. "Just stay calm," Damien murmured, glancing at his wife. He saw the familiar, heartbreaking tension in her jaw. It didn't matter that they were successful professionals in their 40s. In the glare of those police spotlights, out here in the dark, they were stripped of their titles. In the rearview mirror, Damien watched the silhouette of the police officer step out of the cruiser. The officer didn't approach immediately. He stood behind his open door for a long moment, shining a high-powered flashlight directly into the sedan's rearview mirror, blinding Damien. It was an intimidation tactic, plain and simple. Finally, heavy boots crunched on the gravel. The officer took his time, placing a hand on the trunk of Damien's car, leaving a fingerprint, standard procedure before slowly walking up to the driver's side window. The beam of the flashlight swept aggressively over the pristine leather interior, pausing on Cassandra's designer purse, lingering on Damien's expensive watch, before shining directly into Damien's eyes. "Evening," the officer barked. The voice was gruff, dripping with unearned authority. "Good evening, officer," Damien replied smoothly, blinking against the harsh light. "How can I help you?" The flashlight lowered just enough to reveal the face of Officer Gregory Patterson. He was a heavily built man in his late 30s, his uniform strained against his chest, his face flushed and jaw set in a hard, confrontational line. Patterson's eyes darted between Damien and Cassandra, calculating, judging. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Patterson demanded, not offering a reason for the stop. "Officer, before I reach into my glove compartment, may I ask why I was pulled over?" Damien asked, his tone unfailingly polite, but firm. Patterson's posture instantly stiffened. His right hand, which had been resting on his belt, drifted closer to the butt of his service weapon. It was a micro-movement, but Damien caught it. He had spent his entire career reading body language. "You swerved over the yellow line back by the mile marker," Patterson lied, his tone dripping with a condescending sneer. "Now, hand over the documents. Or do you want to make this difficult, boy?" The word hung in the cold night air. "Boy." Cassandra gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Damien's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek, but his eyes remained dead calm. He had faced down cartel bosses, ruthless, corrupt politicians, and hardened killers. He was not about to lose his cool over a bigoted small-town bully with a badge and an ego problem. "I assure you, officer, I maintained my lane perfectly," Damien stated, keeping his hands glued to the wheel. "But I will comply. My registration and insurance are in the glove box. My wallet is in my left breast pocket. I am going to reach across with my right hand to open the glove box now." Patterson leaned closer to the window, the smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum wafting into the car. "Move slow. Really slow." Damien moved with deliberate, exaggerated slowness. He nodded to Cassandra, who unlatched the glove box. She pulled out the registration and insurance cards, her hands trembling slightly, and handed them to Damien. He then used 2 fingers to fish his wallet from his suit jacket, extracting his driver's license. He handed the stack of documents through the window. Patterson snatched them away. He didn't look at the documents immediately. Instead, he leaned his forearms against the doorframe, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Damien's. "Nice car," Patterson sneered, his eyes scanning the dashboard. "Pretty expensive ride for around here." "Whose is it?" "It's mine, officer," Damien said. "Is that right?" Patterson scoffed, finally shining his light on the license. "Damien Hastings. You live over on the new Ridgeview development? We moved in 3 months ago," Cassandra spoke up, her voice tight but courageous. Patterson shifted his gaze to her, sweeping the flashlight over her dress in a way that made Damien's blood run cold. "I was talking to the driver, ma'am. Keep quiet, unless spoken to." "Officer," Damien's voice cracked like a whip in the confined space, dropping the polite pretense. It was low, resonant, and carried the unmistakable weight of command. "Do not speak to my wife that way. You have my documents. Run them. Write the citation if you believe I committed a traffic violation, and let us be on our way." Patterson laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You've got a lot of mouth on you, Hastings. You think because you wear a fancy suit and live up on the ridge, you can tell me how to do my job in my town? I expect you to follow the law and standard police procedure," Damien countered. "Here's procedure for you," Patterson said, stepping back and unclipping his radio. "Dispatch. This is Unit 4. I need a secondary unit out here on 119, just past the county line. Got a suspicious vehicle. Uncooperative driver. I'm gonna pull him out." Cassandra's breath hitched. "Damien, it's going to be fine, Cass," Damien whispered, not taking his eyes off Patterson. He knew exactly what this was. Contempt of cop. Patterson was manufacturing probable cause out of thin air because his ego had been bruised. He was fishing for a reaction, hoping Damien would raise his voice, make a sudden movement, or give him the excuse he so desperately wanted to escalate the situation into a physical altercation. "Step out of the vehicle." "Hastings," Patterson ordered, his hand resting fully on his holster now. "Officer Patterson," Damien said, having read the name tag. "Under Pennsylvania v. Mims, I recognize your authority to order me out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. However, I want it on the record that I am complying under duress, and I am not resisting." Patterson looked momentarily thrown by the citation of Supreme Court case law, but his arrogance quickly masked his confusion. "Just get out of the damn car." Damien opened the door and stepped out into the chill night air. He stood at 6'2", broad-shouldered and imposing, towering over Patterson. But Damien immediately turned around, placed his hands flat on the roof of his car, and spread his legs slightly. It was the stance of someone who had done this before, though usually, he was the one giving the orders. "Pat down," Patterson grunted, stepping up behind Damien. He kicked Damien's ankles further apart. Much harder than necessary, he began a rough, invasive pat-down, his hands lingering, squeezing, searching for anything. "You smell like alcohol." Patterson lied again, leaning into Damien's neck. "I haven't had a drop to drink tonight," Damien replied, staring straight ahead at the dark pines. "We just came from a dinner. You know that. You are fabricating reasonable suspicion." "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here," Patterson mocked. "What's in the car, Hastings? You running drugs out to the suburbs? Moving stolen property?" Inside the car, Cassandra had pulled out her smartphone and hit record. She held it up, making sure Patterson was in the frame. Patterson caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He spun around, stepping away from Damien and marching toward the passenger window. "Put that phone away right now. Put it down or I'll arrest you for interfering with a police investigation. She has a First Amendment right to record police activity in a public space," Damien said sharply, taking a half step away from the car. I told you to stay on the car. Patterson roared, spinning back toward Damien, his flashlight raised high like a club. You move again, and I'll drop you right here on the asphalt. Do you understand me? The tension was suffocating. The flashing blue lights painted the scene in chaotic bursts. Damien looked at the raised flashlight, then down at Patterson's white-knuckled grip on it. He saw the genuine, unhinged aggression in the cop's eyes. This wasn't just poor training. This was malice. I understand perfectly, Damien said, stepping back to the car and placing his hands on the roof. I am not moving. That's right, you're not. Patterson breathed heavily, holstering his flashlight. Now, I'm going to search this vehicle. I smell marijuana. You do not smell marijuana, Damien said, his voice absolute ice. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. You have no probable cause, no warrant, and no lawful reason to enter my property. I don't need your consent, Patterson smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. The smell of narcotics gives me all the probable cause I need. He reached for the handle of the back door. This was the line. Damien had played along, gathered the evidence of Patterson's gross misconduct, and ensured Cassandra had it all on video. But he was not going to let this rogue officer tear apart his wife's car on a fabricated pretense. Officer Patterson, Damien said, his voice ringing out loudly over the hum of the idling police cruiser. I strongly advise you to step away from that door. Patterson froze, his hand on the latch. He looked back at Damien, enraged. Are you threatening a police officer? I am issuing a professional warning. Damien turned around, leaning his back against the car, crossing his arms over his chest. He was no longer the subservient citizen. His posture shifted entirely. He stood like a man who owned the highway. If you open that door, you will be violating federal law, and you will be facing severe consequences. I am officially ordering you to stand down. Patterson let out a barking laugh of disbelief. You're ordering me? Who the hell do you think you are? Before Damien could answer, the wail of a second siren pierced the night. A second Pine Valley police cruiser came tearing around the bend, tires screeching as it pulled up behind Patterson's car. The doors flew open, and two backup officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts, assessing the scene. Everything good here, Greg? The older of the two new officers called out, eyeing Damien warily. Yeah, Miller. Just got a hostile driver, Patterson shouted back, emboldened by his backup. Refusing a lawful order. I'm about to search the vehicle. He's got something to hide. Officer Miller walked up, shining his own light. He looked at Damien's tailored suit, the pristine luxury car, and then at Patterson. You got probable cause, Greg? Smelled weed, Patterson lied effortlessly. Driver's acting erratic. I am acting remarkably restrained given the circumstances. Damien spoke up, addressing the new officer. Officer Miller, is it? I do not consent to a search. Your colleague here has lied about my driving, lied about smelling alcohol, and is now lying about smelling narcotics to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. He has also threatened my wife for legally recording this interaction. Miller frowned, looking at Patterson. Greg, you sure about the smell? Whose side are you on, Miller? Patterson snapped. I got this. Step back. Patterson yanked the back door of the sedan open. Cassandra, Damien said clearly, not moving a muscle. Open the glove compartment again. Underneath the insurance papers, there is a small black leather wallet. Hand it to me, please. Patterson stopped halfway into the back seat, pulling his head out. Hey, keep your hands where I can see them. Do not reach for anything. He drew his service weapon, pointing it downward but ready, screaming at Cassandra. Put your hands on the dash. Now, put your gun away, Patterson, or your career ends tonight, Damien commanded. The sheer authority in his voice actually made Patterson freeze. Cassandra, shaking but trusting her husband entirely, opened the glove box, retrieved the heavy leather folio, and passed it through the open driver's side window to Damien. Damien caught it smoothly in his right hand. He flipped it open with a flick of his wrist and held it out, directly into the beam of Officer Miller's flashlight. The silver badge caught the light, gleaming brilliantly against the dark leather. But it wasn't the badge that made Officer Miller gasp and take a sharp step backward. It was the credentials paneled opposite the badge. Bold, stark lettering across the top read, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Beneath it was Damien's stern photograph, and the words, Derek Hastings, Senior Supervisory Special Agent, Assistant Special Agent in Charge. The silence that fell over the highway was absolute. save for the hum of the engines. Officer Miller's jaw dropped. He looked from the credentials, up to Damien's icy stare, and then over to Patterson, who was still holding his gun at his side, oblivious to what had just transpired. "Greg," Miller said, his voice suddenly very thin, very strained. "Greg, put the gun in the holster." "Right now," Patterson scowled. "What? Why?" "This guy is," I said. "Holster the weapon, Patterson." Miller barked, real panic edging into his voice. He walked over and physically pushed Patterson's arm down. "Look at what he's holding." Patterson blinked, confused, and finally shone his flashlight onto the leather wallet in Damien's hand. It took 3 seconds for Patterson's brain to process the words. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent in charge. The highest-ranking federal law enforcement officer in a 300-mile radius. The color completely drained from Patterson's face, leaving him looking sickly pale in the strobing blue lights. His hand began to shake so violently he could barely get his weapon back into its holster. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a look of profound, stomach-dropping terror. "You," Patterson stammered, his tough guy facade shattering into a million pieces. "You're FBI?" Damien slowly closed the leather folio and slipped it back into his breast pocket. He stepped away from the car, closing the distance between himself and Patterson. Patterson instinctively shrank back, suddenly looking very small inside his uniform. "I am Assistant Special Agent in charge Damien Hastings, commanding the Violent Crimes and Public Corruption Task Force for this region," Damien said, his voice a lethal, quiet purr. "And you, Officer Patterson, have just made the most catastrophic mistake of your professional life." The air on Route 119 seemed to turn to lead. The flashing blue lights of the cruisers continued to pulse against the tree line, but the chaotic, predatory energy that had defined the traffic stop just moments ago had completely evaporated. It was replaced by a suffocating, terrifying vacuum. Officer Gregory Patterson stared at the gold-embossed lettering on the leather folio as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the hood of the car. The swagger, the sneer, the casual cruelty that had oozed from his pores had vanished, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a man realizing he had just willingly walked into a wood chipper. "Sir." "Agent Hastings," Patterson stammered, the words catching in his dry throat. He took another stumbling step backward, his hands instinctively rising in a placating gesture. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Damien asked, his voice deceptively quiet, cutting through the ambient hum of the idling police engines. "You didn't know that the black man you decided to harass on a dark, isolated road held a rank higher than your chief of police? Is that the threshold for basic human decency and constitutional adherence, Officer Patterson? An FBI badge?" Patterson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked desperately toward his backup. Officer Miller and the third officer, a young rookie named Reed, had practically frozen in place. Miller had his hands firmly planted on his tactical vest, far away from his service weapon, telegraphing absolute non-aggression. Reed looked like he wanted the asphalt to swallow him whole. "Agent Hastings," Miller spoke up, his voice tight with forced professionalism and underlying panic. "Sir, there's clearly been a massive misunderstanding here. If we could just—" "There is no misunderstanding, Officer Miller," Damien interrupted smoothly. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "I was driving exactly the speed limit. I maintained my lane perfectly. Your colleague initiated a pretextual stop without probable cause. He escalated the situation aggressively, fabricated suspicions of alcohol and narcotics to manufacture a search, and physically threatened my wife for exercising her First Amendment rights. The only misunderstanding here is Officer Patterson's belief that the badge on his chest grants him immunity from the United States Constitution." Damien turned his cold gaze back to Patterson. "Step away from my vehicle. Now." Patterson practically tripped over his own boots as he scrambled backward, putting a solid 10 feet between himself and the dark sapphire sedan. Inside the car, Cassandra had kept the camera rolling. Her hands had stopped shaking. The terror that had gripped her chest was slowly being replaced by a profound, righteous anger. She kept the lens focused on Patterson's pale, sweat-drenched face. She knew, as well as Damien did, that this wasn't just about them. If Damien hadn't been an assistant special agent in charge, if they had been just another couple driving home, this night could have ended in an arrest, an assault, or worse. Damien reached into his right pocket and pulled out his smartphone. "Who is the shift commander tonight?" Miller swallowed hard. "Sergeant Gibson, sir. Ricky Gibson. And your chief of police is Robert Danvers, correct?" Damien asked, already scrolling through his contacts. He had met Chief Danvers 6 months ago during a joint federal-state initiative on interstate narcotics trafficking. Danvers was an old-school lawman, strict but generally regarded as fair. "Yes, sir," Miller replied. "Good," Damien said. He tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear. The time was 11:42 p.m. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy, gravelly voice answered. "Danvers. Chief Danvers. This is Assistant Special Agent in Charge Damien Hastings, FBI Field Office. I apologize for waking you." There was a rustle of sheets over the speaker, and then Danvers' voice came through sharper. The sleep instantly banished. "Agent Hastings. What's going on?" "Is there a situation?" "There is," Damien said. His eyes locked on Patterson, who looked like he was about to vomit. "I am currently stopped on the shoulder of Route 119, just inside your jurisdiction. I have been detained by one of your patrolmen, an Officer Gregory Patterson. Chief, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your officer has conducted an illegal stop, attempted a warrantless search under manufactured pretenses, and threatened physical violence against my wife. I have 2 other officers on the scene, a Miller and a Reed, who arrived as backup. Dead silence fell over the line. Even through the phone, Damien could practically hear the blood draining from the chief's face. "Agent Hastings," Danvers finally said, his voice deadly serious. "Are you and your wife safe?" "We are currently uninjured," Damien replied. "But I am officially initiating a federal complaint, and I am holding this scene. I am requesting that you, personally, come down to this location immediately. I will not release your officers until you arrive. I am putting my boots on right now, Damien. 10 minutes. Do not let Patterson leave." The line went dead. Damien lowered the phone. He looked at the 3 local cops. "Chief Danvers is en route. You will all stand exactly where you are. Turn your body cameras on, if they aren't already. You are not to speak to each other. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Miller and Reed chorused immediately. Patterson, however, began to hyperventilate. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like an avalanche. He wasn't just facing a citizen complaint that his union rep could sweep under the rug. He had unlawfully detained and threatened one of the highest-ranking federal agents in the state. He was looking at the end of his career, the loss of his pension, and potentially federal prison. "Agent Hastings." "Please," Patterson begged, taking a half-step forward, his hands clasped together. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic whining of a bully who had finally met a bigger fish. "Please, sir. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I made a mistake. It was dark. I misread the situation. We can just walk away from this. I'll rip up the ticket. I swear to God, I'll never bother you again." Damien felt a cold, hard knot of disgust tighten in his stomach. He looked at Patterson with absolute contempt. "You have a family?" Damien echoed softly. "The man you pulled over last week, David Owens. He had a family too, didn't he? When you dragged him out of his car on this exact same stretch of road, cuffed him, and tore his vehicle apart for 2 hours, leaving his terrified children crying in the back seat. Did you care about his family then?" Patterson's eyes widened in sheer horror. How do you?" "I'm the FBI, Patterson," Damien said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly in the night air. "We know everything. You thought this was a random stop? I've been reading the civil rights complaints flowing out of Pine Valley for the last 6 months. Tonight wasn't just a coincidence. It was a confirmation. It was a brilliant bluff. A tactical, psychological strike." Damien hadn't known about Patterson specifically before tonight, but he knew the patterns of corrupt, racially biased policing. He knew the statistics of Pine Valley, and the look on Patterson's face confirmed that Damien had just hit the bullseye. 10 minutes later, the wail of a third siren echoed through the trees. A sleek, unmarked black SUV tore onto the shoulder, kicking up a cloud of gravel. Chief Robert Danvers practically threw himself out of the vehicle before it had even fully stopped in park. He was half-dressed in uniform trousers and a civilian jacket, his face flushed with a mixture of sleep deprivation and pure, unadulterated fury. He took one look at the scene. The pristine luxury sedan. Damien standing calmly by the door with his federal credentials visible in his pocket. Cassandra recording from the passenger seat, and his 3 officers standing frozen like statues in the headlights. Danvers marched straight up to Patterson. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "Patterson," Danvers hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "Give me your badge and your weapon, right now. Chief, please. It's a misunderstanding. I said right now." Danvers roared, the sudden volume making everyone flinch. With shaking hands, Patterson unclipped his radio, drew his sidearm, carefully popped the magazine out, cleared the chamber, and handed the weapon over. He then unpinned the silver shield from his chest and dropped it into Danvers' outstretched palm. You are suspended without pay. Effective immediately. Pending a full internal and federal investigation, Danvers told him, his voice laced with disgust. He turned to Miller. Put him in the back of your cruiser. Take him to the precinct. Do not let him speak to anyone. As Miller escorted a sobbing Patterson away, Danvers turned to Damien, running a hand over his face. Agent Hastings. I cannot express my profound apologies. This is not how my department operates. It's exactly how your department operates on the night shift, Robert. Damien corrected him firmly. And we are going to fix it. Starting tomorrow morning, the true power of the federal government does not always manifest in flashbangs and tactical raids. Often, it is a quiet, relentless bureaucratic machine that grinds corruption down to dust. The morning after the traffic stop, the atmosphere inside the Pine Valley Police Department was toxic with panic. Word had spread like wildfire before the sun even rose. Patterson had pulled over the wrong guy. But no one anticipated the sheer magnitude of the storm that was about to hit them. At precisely 8 a.m., 3 black Suburbans rolled into the precinct parking lot. A team of 6 federal agents, led by Special Agent Sarah Collins from the Civil Rights Division, walked through the double-glass doors. They didn't wear raid jackets, but they carried thick, empty cardboard boxes and a stack of federal subpoenas signed by a federal judge at 6 a.m. that morning. Damien did not accompany them. He was sitting at his large mahogany desk in the regional field office, 40 miles away, looking out over the city skyline. He had spent the remaining hours of the night drafting the preliminary report and fast-tracking the Title 18 USC. Section 242 investigation, deprivation of rights, under color of law. He had promised Cassandra that this wouldn't just be about seeking personal revenge for a ruined anniversary dinner. It was going to be an extraction of a cancer. By noon, Agent Collins was sitting in a cramped conference room inside the Pine Valley precinct, staring across a metal table at a deeply sweating Officer Patterson and his frantic union attorney. Officer Patterson, Agent Collins began, her voice clinically detached. She opened a thick file folder. Over the past 48 hours, the Bureau has executed warrants on your department lockers, your cruiser's dashcam servers, and your personal electronic devices. Would you like to know what we found? Patterson stared blankly, looking visibly aged. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, advising silence. We found a pattern, Collins continued, ignoring the lawyer. We pulled the data from your cruiser. It seems your dashcam has an incredible knack for malfunctioning precisely when you pull over minority drivers on Route 119. 32 malfunctions in the last 18 months. Oddly enough, your microphone still caught audio on 14 of those stops. Audio of you using racial slurs, threatening physical violence, and manufacturing probable cause for illegal vehicle searches. She slid a photograph across the table. It showed a small, cheap spiral notebook that had been recovered from Patterson's locker. We also found this, Collins said. A little ledger. You kept track of the cash you seized from these drivers under the guise of civil asset forfeiture, without ever filing the proper paperwork or logging it into evidence. You were robbing citizens under the cover of a badge, Patterson. The lawyer blanched, leaning away from his client. Officer Patterson asserts his Fifth Amendment rights, and we are concluding this interview. That's fine, Collins said, closing the file. He'll have plenty of time to assert his rights in federal court. The karma hit Pine Valley like a freight train. Over the next 3 weeks, the quiet suburban town became the epicenter of a massive federal scandal. The local news stations camped out on the precinct lawn. The investigation, spearheaded by Damien's task force, revealed that Patterson wasn't acting entirely alone. A small clique of night shift officers had created a culture of profiling and intimidation, operating under the assumption that the people they targeted would be too scared or too poor to fight back. They had never accounted for pulling over a man with the resources and the unyielding will of Damien Hastings. Patterson was formally terminated from the Pine Valley Police Department by the end of the first week. By the end of the month, a federal grand jury handed down a 12-count indictment against him, including civil rights violations, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Officer Miller and Sergeant Gibson were forced into early retirement, narrowly avoiding charges themselves in exchange for cooperating as witnesses against Patterson. Chief Danvers, humiliated but cooperative, was forced to accept a federal consent decree, allowing the Department of Justice to completely overhaul the precinct's training, hiring, and accountability protocols. 6 months after the incident on Route 119, Damien and Cassandra were sitting on the back patio of their Ridgeview home, drinking coffee as the sun set over the pines. The air was warm, and the neighborhood was quiet. Cassandra was reading an article on her tablet. The headline of the local paper read, "Disgraced ex, Cop Gregory Patterson, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison." She set the tablet down on the glass table and looked across at her husband. Damien looked tired, but there was a quiet peace in his eyes that hadn't been there a few months ago. 8 years, Cassandra murmured. "Do you think it's enough?" Damien took a slow sip of his black coffee, his gaze drifting toward the tree line that bordered the highway a few miles away. He thought about the fear he had felt that night, not for himself, but for his wife. He thought about David Owens and the dozens of other nameless victims who had suffered in silence on that dark stretch of road. Terrified of the men sworn to protect them. "It's not just about the years he spends in a cell, Cass," Damien said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It's about the precedent. It's about the message it sends to every other badge out there who thinks the darkness hides their sins. We didn't just stop a bad cop. We turned the lights on." Cassandra squeezed his hand, a small, proud smile touching her lips. "Yes, we did. The system was flawed, and one federal case wouldn't fix the world. But as the shadows lengthened across Pine Valley, Damien knew that the roads were a little safer, the badge a little cleaner, and the scales of justice had been forcefully, undeniably balanced. The swift termination and federal indictment of Officer Gregory Patterson should have been the end of the nightmare. For the media, the narrative was neatly wrapped in a bow. A rogue, racist cop had finally picked the wrong victim, faced the wrath of the FBI, and was heading to a federal penitentiary. The local news cycle began to move on. The Pine Valley City Council issued a boilerplate statement condemning racism and promising transparency. But Assistant Special Agent in Charge Damien Hastings did not believe in isolated incidents, especially not in municipalities with perfectly paved roads and suspiciously bloated civic budgets. The notebook recovered from Patterson's locker, the ledger detailing thousands of dollars in unlogged cash seized from motorists, gnawed at Damien. A patrolman pulling down that kind of illicit revenue does not operate in a vacuum. He operates within an ecosystem that either ignores the rot or actively feeds on it. A week after Patterson's arraignment, Damien convened a classified briefing in the secure conference room of the regional FBI field office. The room was soundproofed, stripped of all electronics save for the main projector, and occupied by the 5 most ruthless forensic accountants and corruption investigators in the Bureau. Among them was Special Agent Sarah Collins, who had led the initial raid on the precinct. Patterson was a bully, but he wasn't a mastermind, Damien said, pacing at the head of the table. He brought up a slide showing the financial disclosures of Pine Valley over the last decade. Look at the municipal budget. 10 years ago, Pine Valley was struggling to maintain its public parks. Today, they have a state-of-the-art recreation center, a newly renovated city hall, and a police fleet that looks like a paramilitary outfit. The property taxes here are high, but they aren't that high. Agent Collins tapped her pen against her legal pad. We followed the money from Patterson's ledger. He wasn't keeping all of it. In fact, he was only keeping about 15%. The rest of the cash he seized during those illegal stops was deposited into an evidence lockbox. But here is the twist. That money never made it to the county prosecutor's office for official civil asset forfeiture proceedings. Damien stopped pacing. Where did it go? It was transferred into a discretionary municipal fund, Collins explained, bringing up a complex web of banking transactions on the screen. A fund controlled exclusively by 2 men, the mayor of Pine Valley, Ricky Whitmore, and the presiding municipal judge, Samuel Clayton. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with the sudden realization of the sheer scale of the conspiracy. This wasn't just a case of driving while black. This was an organized, municipally sanctioned criminal enterprise. Mayor Whitmore was a staple of local high society, a silver-haired politician who shook hands at country clubs and preached about law and order at every election cycle. Judge Clayton was a former state prosecutor known for handing down maximum sentences to minor offenders, effectively turning the local courthouse into a processing plant for the prison system. They were using the police force as modern-day highwaymen, Damien deduced, his jaw tightening, targeting minorities, out-of-state plates, and anyone who didn't look like they had the money to hire a defense attorney. Patterson terrorizes them on the shoulder of Route 119, threatens them with fabricated drug charges, and seizes their cash. The victims are too terrified or financially drained to fight back. The money gets funneled into Whitmore's pet projects to keep the voters happy, and Judge Clayton rubber stamps the seizures so there's no official paper trail. And the kickbacks? Damien asked, Shell companies, Collins replied, a grim smile forming. Whitmore owns a consulting firm under his wife's maiden name. Clayton has a nephew who runs a construction company that suspiciously wins every single municipal contract in Pine Valley. Millions of dollars. Agent Hastings. All built on the backs of people like David Owens. And you. Damien looked at the faces of his agents. We don't just want the tail. We want the head of the snake. Draft the subpoenas. Tap their phones. I want every bank record. Every email. And every text message Whitmore and Clayton have sent in the last 5 years. We are going to tear this town's establishment down to the bedrock. The investigation operated in absolute secrecy for 3 grueling months. Damien worked 18-hour days, fueled by black coffee and a cold, unrelenting sense of righteous fury. Cassandra, recognizing the toll the case was taking on him, became his anchor, providing a quiet sanctuary when he finally returned home long past midnight. She knew that the fear she had felt on that dark highway had been weaponized by men in suits, men who felt utterly untouchable. The climax of the investigation did not happen on a highway, but in the opulent dining room of the Pine Valley Country Club. Mayor Ricky Whitmore was hosting a lavish fundraising dinner. He was holding court at the center table, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, laughing loudly with wealthy donors and toasting to the continued prosperity of their beautiful community. He felt invincible. Patterson was taking the fall. The FBI seemed to have packed up and left, and his slush fund was secure. He was mid-sentence, raising a crystal glass of champagne, when the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. The ambient chatter of the room died instantly, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots on hardwood. 20 federal agents, wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI in stark yellow lettering, fanned out across the room, securing every exit. Damien walked straight down the center aisle, bypassing the stunned waiters and gasping socialites. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his federal badge clipped visibly to his belt, his eyes locked onto Whitmore like a predator tracking prey. Whitmore slowly lowered his glass, his face flushing with a mixture of indignation and sudden, icy dread. What is the meaning of this? Do you have any idea who I am? This is a private event. Ricky Whitmore, Damien said, his voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent room, carrying the absolute authority of the United States government. You are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Whitmore stood up, knocking his chair backward. This is an outrage. I demand to speak to my attorney. You can't just barge in here. Damien didn't blink. He motioned to Agent Collins, who stepped forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent, Damien recited, his voice completely devoid of emotion as Collins spun the mayor around and secured his wrists behind his back. The sharp click of the metal echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Across town, a simultaneous raid was taking place at the suburban estate of Judge Samuel Clayton. The man who had sentenced countless young men to prison for minor infractions was dragged out of his bed in his pajamas, weeping openly as agents boxed up his computers and financial records. The untouchables had just been touched. The federal courthouse in the city center became the stage for one of the most explosive political corruption trials in the state's history. The media circus was deafening. The citizens of Pine Valley, who had long turned a blind eye to the whispers of corruption as long as their property values remained high, were suddenly forced to look at the grotesque underbelly of their pristine town. The defense attorneys for Whitmore and Clayton, high-priced legal sharks imported from out of state, attempted every trick in the book. They filed motion after motion to suppress evidence. They tried to paint the FBI investigation as a personal vendetta led by an overzealous Agent Hastings, who was simply embarrassed by a traffic stop. They argued that the financial anomalies were merely administrative errors, sloppy bookkeeping rather than malicious intent. But Damien had built a fortress of evidence. The trial lasted 6 agonizing weeks. The turning point, the moment the karma hit with the force of a wrecking ball, came during the 3rd week of testimony. The prosecution called their star witness. The courtroom doors opened, and a side door admitted a man clad in a bright orange federal prison jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles shackled. It was Gregory Patterson. The former officer looked utterly destroyed. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair was thinning, and his posture was hunched, stripped of all the aggressive bravado that had fueled his reign of terror on Route 119. He avoided looking at Damien, who sat perfectly still at the prosecution table. Patterson shuffled to the witness stand and swore an oath. The lead federal prosecutor, Matthew Reynolds, approached the podium. Mr. Patterson, Prosecutor Reynolds began, his voice ringing through the packed gallery. You are currently serving an 8-year sentence in federal prison for civil rights violations. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Patterson mumbled into the microphone, his voice raspy and weak. You entered into a plea agreement with the government to testify in this trial. What were you promised in exchange for your testimony today? Nothing, Patterson admitted, staring at his chained hands. No reduction in sentence. I just wanted to get it on the record. I wanted to tell the truth, Reynolds nodded. Let's talk about the money. The cash you seized from motorists on Route 119. Who instructed you to target out-of-state drivers and minorities? Patterson took a shaky breath and looked directly at the defense table, where Mayor Whitmore and Judge Clayton sat, glaring daggers at him. The mayor, Patterson said, his voice trembling but clear enough for the entire jury to hear. Mayor Whitmore called it the Revenue Enhancement Initiative. He told the shift sergeants that the town needed capital, and that we should focus on demographics that wouldn't have the resources to fight back in court. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Whitmore's attorney jumped up. Objection. Hearsay. Overruled, the federal judge snapped. Proceed. And what was Judge Clayton's role? Reynolds pressed. Judge Clayton assured us that as long as we logged the cash as suspected drug proceeds, he would push the forfeiture through the municipal court without requiring a formal hearing, Patterson confessed, a tear slipping down his cheek. He told us not to worry about probable cause, he said. He said, the bench will catch whatever you throw. The absolute betrayal of the public trust was laid bare. Patterson spent 3 hours on the stand detailing exactly how the scheme worked, corroborating every single wire transfer and offshore shell company the FBI had uncovered. He detailed the culture of racism and impunity that Whitmore and Clayton had actively fostered, turning public servants into armed robbers. When it was Damien's turn to take the stand a week later, the defense tried to rattle him. They played the video Cassandra had recorded of the traffic stop, attempting to show that Damien had been uncooperative. Agent Hastings, the defense attorney sneered, pacing in front of the jury box. You escalated this situation, didn't you? You refused to step out of the car, initially. You used your badge to intimidate a local police officer. Isn't it true you manufactured this entire federal investigation just to punish the town of Pine Valley for a simple traffic dispute? Damien looked at the defense attorney with cold, unwavering composure. He leaned into the microphone. Counselor, Damien said, his voice resonant and commanding. I did not escalate the situation. I survived it. If I had not possessed federal credentials, Officer Patterson would have illegally searched my vehicle, likely assaulted me, and potentially planted evidence, just as he did to dozens of other victims at the behest of your clients. I did not manufacture an investigation. I simply illuminated a criminal enterprise that was hiding behind the color of law. My badge did not intimidate Officer Patterson. It terrified him, because for the first time in his career, he realized there were consequences for his cruelty. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was dead silent. On the count of racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organizations conspiracy, we find the defendant, Ricky Whitmore, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant, guilty. The word echoed over and over. Guilty. Guilty. Guilty on all 24 counts for both the mayor and the judge. Whitmore collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands, his pristine reputation and political empire shattered into dust. Judge Clayton openly sobbed. The gavel he had used as a weapon against the poor and marginalized finally turned against him. 2 months later, federal sentencing guidelines showed no mercy. Mayor Ricky Whitmore was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Judge Samuel Clayton, given his egregious abuse of judicial power, received 25 years. Their assets were frozen, seized, and liquidated to establish a massive restitution fund for the victims they had targeted over the years. David Owens, the man Patterson had terrorized just a week before pulling over Damien, received a check that paid off his mortgage and secured his children's college tuition. The town of Pine Valley was forever changed. The police department was gutted and rebuilt from the ground up under strict federal oversight. The culture of silence and complicity was shattered. One evening, nearly 2 years after the flashing blue lights had first pierced the darkness of Route 119, Damien and Cassandra took a drive. They drove down the same winding, unlit stretch of highway. The towering pines looked the same, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different. As they passed the mile marker where they had been pulled over, a new Pine Valley police cruiser passed them going the opposite direction. Damien tensed instinctively, his hands tightening on the wheel, But the cruiser didn't slow down. It didn't turn around. The officer inside simply offered a brief professional nod of acknowledgement as they passed, continuing on their patrol to actually protect and serve the community. Cassandra reached across the center console and placed her warm hand over Damien's rigid knuckles. She smiled softly, the green dashboard lights illuminating the profound peace in her eyes. "You can relax now, Damien," she whispered. "We're just driving home." Damien exhaled a long, deep breath he felt like he had been holding for 2 years. He loosened his grip on the wheel, intertwining his fingers with hers. The road ahead was clear, the shadows banished by the undeniable, unyielding light of justice. They drove on into the night, free at last. The story of Damien and Cassandra Hastings serves as a chilling reminder of the systemic vulnerabilities within local law enforcement and the terrifying reality of racial profiling. However, it also stands as a powerful testament to the triumph of accountability. The true twists of this narrative do not lie in sudden betrayals, but in the methodical, unrelenting unearthing of deep-seated corruption by federal authorities. By exposing the financial and political rot orchestrated by Mayor Whitmore and Judge Clayton, justice was served not just for one couple, but for an entire community victimized by those sworn to protect them. This hard-won karma emphasizes a crucial societal truth. No badge, no gavel, and no political office grants immunity from the law. Ultimately, it reinforces the necessity of vigilance, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth to ensure the scales of justice remain balanced for everyone, regardless of the darkness they face.